The air inside the restaurant was thick with warmth and weekend chatter, the kind that blurred together into a low hum of forks clinking against plates and casual conversation. At the center table, surrounded by family-style dishes and the faint smell of syrup, four middle-aged men leaned in close over steaming mugs of coffee. One of them motioned toward the corner with a flick of his chin, voice lowered but just loud enough. "See that guy with the cane? What kind of soldier walks like that?" The others chuckled, glancing at the figure he pointed out, a man sitting alone near the window, dressed in a faded brown jacket that hung loose on his wiry frame. His snow-white hair was combed neatly, though his collar sat slightly crooked, as if he had dressed himself with hands that didn't move the way they once did. His left wrist rested lightly on the table, the skin wrinkled and pale, revealing a tattoo so faded it looked like it might have been drawn in pencil and nearly erased. A dagger through an anchor. "That old thing," another man scoffed, eyeing the tattoo. "Looks like something he got drunk off a pier in the 70s. Bet he wasn't even in the military." The man in the corner, Robert Ellis, heard them. He didn't flinch, didn't look up. His eyes stayed focused on the small tray in front of him, scrambled eggs, 2 slices of toast, and a glass of water with no ice. It was the Veterans Day special. He hadn't come for the discount. He never did. But they always assumed he had. People had a way of looking through him. Not past him, through him. Like he was part of the wallpaper, just another dusty fixture in the room, invisible and less inconvenient. He could feel the weight of their eyes like static. It wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last. A server, young and visibly nervous, approached his table. She clutched her order pad, as if it might shield her from discomfort. "Sir," she began, almost in a whisper, "I'm really sorry, but someone said you're making them uncomfortable. Would you mind sitting out on the patio?" Robert looked at her for the first time, really looked. She wasn't much older than 20. Her voice was shaking slightly, but her gaze didn't meet his. She was doing her job. He nodded once, not trusting himself to speak. No anger, no protest, just the smallest gesture of acceptance. He picked up his tray, balancing it in his right hand as he gripped his cane with the left. The prosthetic leg beneath his trousers clicked softly as he stood. No one offered to help. No one even moved aside. As he shuffled past the men who had laughed, one leaned back in his chair and muttered, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, "If he's really a SEAL, then I'm the goddamn president." Their table erupted in laughter again, sharper this time. Cutting. The sound bounced off the restaurant walls like a slap. Still, Robert didn't stop. His only reply was the subtle tremble of his shoulders and a single tear that escaped, unnoticed by anyone except the tile floor it darkened. His tray rattled slightly with the weight of movement, but he held it steady. He didn't want to drop anything. Not the food. Not his dignity. Behind the counter, the manager glanced up from his register, saw the scene, and hesitated. His lips parted slightly. Maybe he meant to say something. Maybe not. Either way, the moment passed, and he turned away. Outside, the morning sun struck Robert full in the face, forcing him to squint. His hands ached from gripping the cane too tightly, the knuckles pale against the dark wood. He found an empty table near the edge of the patio, far from the door. The seat was metal and cold. He lowered himself slowly, methodically, like a man placing himself into memory rather than rest. Inside, the laughter continued. But out here, there was only the wind, a faint whistle through the trees, and the quiet creak of his prosthetic leg adjusting under the weight of history no one cared to ask about. Not yet. The cold metal of the chair beneath him seemed to echo a familiar ache, one Robert had carried for over 5 decades, a weight not in the prosthetic leg or the worn-out muscles in his back, but in the quiet corners of his memory. He looked down at the plate of eggs now turning rubbery in the chill air, and thought not of hunger, but of Laos, 1971. Of jungle rot and radio static. Of a promise made, and a voice he would never hear again. No one here knew. They never did. Robert Ellis wasn't always this faded man with shaking hands and a limp that strangers mocked. Once, he was Ellis G7, not a title, not a rank, just a code name whispered through encrypted channels in the middle of nowhere. Logistics technician, SEAL Team Bravo. The man who moved equipment through impossible routes and brought teams home when the maps ran out. He never fired the first shot, rarely the last, but he knew how to calculate time and terrain with the precision of a surgeon. He had memorized rivers and ravines the way others memorized phone numbers. He knew the sound of approaching helicopters before they broke through the clouds, the metallic rattle of stretchers, the hiss of morphine as medics did their work in the red-lit corners of extraction zones. He had held bleeding men together with his bare hands until help came. He had once used his own belt as a tourniquet for a man he would never see again. And James Harrington, had been the loud one, the hopeful one, always laughing, always carrying a photograph of a small-town burger joint in his pocket. New Holland, he'd say with a grin. Best damn burgers in Pennsylvania. When we make it back, I'm buying the first round. That night, on the jungle floor with the insects humming and the darkness pressing in, James had passed the photo to Robert like a sacred text. When this is over, he whispered, you and me. No uniforms, no radios. Just burgers and bad coffee. But the minefield stole that future. Robert was thrown 30 feet by the blast, his leg shredded, his radio cracked in two. But his mind stayed intact. Even as blood soaked the ground beneath him, he remembered the extraction coordinates, visualized the route like he was still back in camp planning the mission. He relayed it by shouting until the signal caught. By the time the chopper arrived, 3 others had been pulled from the jungle alive because Robert, with his shattered body and fading voice, had refused to let them be forgotten. He never got a medal. His name wasn't in the papers. SEAL logistics weren't glamorous. They didn't write movies about the man who packed the supplies or mapped the exit strategy. And when he came home, there were no parades. Just a cardboard box of belongings, a prosthetic leg fitted too quickly, and a quiet discharge buried beneath classified files. So he started over. Colorado was quiet. The town didn't ask questions. He opened a modest auto repair shop with 1 good leg and 2 good hands. He fixed what was broken, never charging more than someone could afford. He taught teenagers how to change oil and listen to engines, but he never mentioned Laos or James, or the pain that woke him at 3 a.m. when the silence was too loud. Only 2 things connected him to that life: a yellowing letter in his wallet, a handwritten note from his commander, reading, "To the most silent soldier I ever commanded," and the tattoo. The dagger through the anchor. It wasn't regulation. It wasn't even official. It was something their unit had come up with in a bunker one night, laughing as James inked it onto their skin with stolen supplies and shaking hands. Something just for us, James had said. So we don't forget. But over time, the world did forget. Or maybe it never cared. Veterans Day became a ritual. Not for glory, not for recognition, but for James. Each year, Robert would find a restaurant, never the same twice, and order a simple meal. If they asked about the tattoo, he said nothing. If they offered thanks, he nodded. If they ignored him, which they usually did, he simply ate and left. This year was different only in its cruelty. But even as he sat outside, cold plate before him and laughter drifting through the glass behind him, Robert didn't resent them. Not really. They couldn't understand. The cost of service wasn't in uniforms or salutes. It was in the memories you carried alone. The ones too painful to speak of, too sacred to reduce to small talk. And yet, as he stared at the outline of the faded tattoo on his wrist, he felt the familiar whisper return. Not from the past. From somewhere deeper. A voice that said, "You kept your promise." That had to be enough. The sun had shifted slightly in the sky, casting slanted beams of light across the patio as Robert stared absently at the untouched eggs now congealed on his plate. The sounds from inside the diner had faded into a kind of white noise, distant and irrelevant, like waves lapping against a sealed room. His thoughts were drifting again, not toward anything particular, but hovering in that familiar liminal space between memory and numbness. He didn't notice the girl until she spoke. "Is this seat taken?" The voice was quiet but clear, a soft tremor beneath its surface, as though spoken from the edge of a decision not yet fully made. Robert looked up slowly, blinking against the glare, and saw her, mid-20s, maybe younger, with dark, tightly curled hair pulled into a low ponytail. She wore a faded denim jacket over a plain black t-shirt, and a canvas messenger bag rested against her hip. Her eyes, brown, steady, but tired in a way he recognized too easily, were focused not on his prosthetic or the tattoo, but on his face. He hesitated, unsure if he'd heard her right. It had been a long time since a stranger asked to sit with him. Even longer since one had done it without pity in their voice. She gestured gently toward the chair across from him. "I can move if you'd prefer to be alone." She paused, eyes flicking down to his wrist, then quickly back up. "I saw your tattoo. My uncle had one just like it." He studied her for a long moment, the kind of look that peered past appearances. There was something in her posture, not confidence, but determination forged in hardship. He nodded once, the same wordless invitation he'd given the waitress earlier, but this time with less resignation. She sat down carefully, adjusting her bag like it carried something fragile. They were quiet for a while. Not awkward silence. Necessary silence. Two people in no hurry to fill the space with words they didn't mean. "My name's Lena," she offered at last, fingers clasped loosely on the table. "I don't usually talk to strangers. Especially not like this. But today's different." Robert gave a faint smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. "It usually is." She nodded slowly. "My uncle, Derek Morales. He was in Vietnam. SEAL Logistics Unit. Never talked about it much. Barely even told the family what he did. Just always seemed like he was carrying something he couldn't set down." Robert's breath caught faintly, almost imperceptibly, but his face remained still. "I remember Derek." Lena's head tilted slightly, unsure if she'd misheard. "You really?" "He was with Bravo," Robert said, voice low, almost reverent. "Morales. Quiet. Tactical. One of the best with terrain navigation. I worked supply routing. Saw him at extraction more than once." For a moment, Lena didn't speak. She just stared at him, emotions flashing across her face, disbelief, wonder, grief, all surfacing at once, as if years of unanswered questions had just collapsed under their own weight. "I didn't even know that much," she said, voice cracking. "He died when I was 12. Heart failure. My mom said the war never really left him. I always wanted to know more. What he went through. What it meant to him. But everyone either didn't know or didn't want to talk about it." Robert looked down, his fingers gently tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "That's how it is for most of us. We carry it in silence. Partly because we're trained to, partly because no one really wants to hear the truth." Lena leaned in slightly. "But I do." The earnestness in her voice was disarming, like someone reaching through fog with both hands. Robert found himself nodding again, this time more slowly, as though unlocking something rusted shut. He told her about Derek's precision, the way he moved through jungle like he'd grown up there, how he always checked the back of the formation even when no one was watching. He didn't offer war stories. No blood, no heroics. Just the details, the human fragments most people skipped over. Lena listened without interrupting, her hands wrapped around a paper cup of tea that had long gone cold. For a while, the space between them grew dense with memory, not heavy, but shared. Robert hadn't spoken this much in years. He hadn't realized how much he needed to. Eventually, she pulled something from her bag. A photograph, folded neatly along worn creases. It showed a young man in jungle fatigues, standing in front of a tent, grinning crookedly at the camera. "This is him. The only photo he ever let us keep. Said it wasn't for the world to see." Robert took the photo carefully, his fingertips brushing the edge as if it were sacred. "That's Bravo Base Camp. 1971, pre-monsoon." He returned the picture with quiet reverence. They sat a little longer, neither in a hurry to leave. When Lena finally stood to go, she turned back to him, hesitation pulling at the corners of her mouth. "I'm sorry about how they treated you inside. People don't know what they're looking at." Robert looked up at her, and for the first time all morning, his smile touched something deeper. "You did." She reached into her bag again and set something on the table. A small notebook. "If you ever want to write it down. For yourself. Or someone else." Then she walked away, her shadow stretching long behind her as she disappeared around the corner. Robert sat there for a long time after. The eggs were cold. The coffee empty. But for the first time in decades, the silence didn't feel like a prison. It felt like possibility. He picked up the notebook. His hand trembled, but not from weakness. And he began to write. The days that followed felt strangely lighter, as if a small crack had formed in the thick wall that had long encased Robert's world in solitude. The worn notebook Lena had left on the table became his companion, its blank pages a silent invitation to unburden a lifetime of memories long buried beneath dust and neglect. Each word he wrote, though halting at first, gradually gained strength, as if the act of telling was a quiet rebellion against years of invisibility. One afternoon, just as the golden hour began softening the edges of the day, Robert found himself back inside the restaurant, this time not at the isolated corner table outside, but seated where the light streamed warmly through the windows, where the hum of life was vibrant and present. It was not by accident. Word had spread quietly among a few who cared, those who had seen the old man's dignity despite the earlier scorn. Jackson Miles was there, the young SEAL whose respect had carved a path through the noise of indifference. He had returned from his leave, determined that Robert would no longer sit in the shadows. Standing beside him now was Lena, the bridge between past and present, the granddaughter of the man whose legacy had intertwined with Robert's own. The restaurant, once a stage for dismissal and discomfort, had transformed. A hush fell over the room as Jackson stood and addressed the gathering of patrons, staff, and neighbors. His voice, steady and clear, filled the space with stories no one had heard before, about the logistics officer who had saved lives not with guns, but with knowledge and courage, about the silent promises kept through decades, about the tattoo that was no mere ink, but a testament to brotherhood and sacrifice. Robert listened, his heart steady but heavy, as names long buried were spoken aloud, as memories once locked away were invited to breathe again. Applause rose, not from obligation, but from genuine reverence. The restaurant, the town, the very air seemed to honor the quiet strength of a man who had given so much without asking for anything in return. When the speeches ended, a gentle murmur spread through the crowd as people approached Robert, not with pity, but with respect, with gratitude. A child handed him a hand-drawn card, a small gesture echoing the larger awakening. An elderly woman clasped his hand and whispered thanks. And Lena, standing close by, smiled with tears glistening, knowing that the silence which had defined her family's past was finally being broken. As twilight deepened, Robert felt the weight of years lift just a little. The wound of neglect, once raw and fresh, began to scar with the healing balm of recognition. Here, in this unexpected moment, the invisible man was seen. The forgotten warrior was honored. And the stories he carried, fragile, fierce, and unyielding, found a home where they would never again be silenced. The recognition that had begun as a tentative ripple in the quiet corners of the diner soon grew into a wave that swept through the community, stirring long-forgotten memories and untold stories. Robert, once relegated to the margins of society, found himself at the center of something larger than his own survival, a living testament to resilience, sacrifice, and the intricate web of human connection that war both unravels and weaves anew. The notebook he had started, fragile and tentative at first, had become a wellspring of voices, capturing not only his memories, but the fragmented histories of comrades, families, and strangers who had carried similar burdens. In time, the community began to gather, drawn not by spectacle but by a collective need to reclaim and honor the legacy that had been buried beneath layers of indifference and silence. Robert, once isolated by trauma and misunderstanding, became an unlikely catalyst for healing, a guide through the tangled landscape of grief and memory. His stories were raw, unsentimental, yet deeply human, peeling back the layers of myth to reveal the profound cost and quiet courage that defined a generation. Workshops emerged, where veterans and civilians alike shared experiences, bridged gaps, and found in one another a kind of fragile solidarity. Lena's family played a vital role, their own journey from loss to understanding mirroring the larger transformation unfolding around them. The old diner, once a symbol of neglect and judgment, was repurposed into a community center, a space where art, remembrance, and dialogue flourished side by side. Walls that had echoed with dismissal now resonated with laughter, tears, and the hum of renewed purpose. Robert watched all of this unfold with a mix of disbelief and cautious hope. The scars etched deep into his psyche did not vanish, but they softened under the gentle weight of acknowledgement and shared humanity. The legacy he left was not one of grand heroics or triumphant victory, but a quiet insistence on being seen, heard, and remembered. It was a legacy forged in the crucible of pain but tempered by the healing power of community. In the twilight of his years, Robert found himself no longer a solitary figure marked by the shadows of war, but a beacon for a community reborn, proof that even the most fractured lives could find wholeness, that from the ashes of misunderstanding could rise a shared future shaped by empathy, respect, and the unbreakable bonds of memory. As the years slipped by, the echoes of Robert's story settled deep into the fabric of the town, becoming less about a single man and more about the collective memory of those who served in silence. The initial shock of recognition had transformed into a quiet ritual, a communal act of remembrance that carried a weight beyond words. On Memorial Day, the streets once indifferent to the struggles of their veterans now brimmed with solemnity and gratitude, the faces in the crowd reflecting the stories that had been brought to light through Robert's life. The ceremony that bore his name was modest, yet heavy with meaning. A bronze plaque was unveiled near the old auto shop, etched with the emblem of the dagger through the anchor, a symbol once obscure but now a beacon of sacrifice and honor. The inscription spoke simply, but with profound clarity, in memory of those who served in silence, whose courage shaped our freedom. For many, this was a moment to reconcile the dissonance between valor and invisibility, to confront the uncomfortable truth that some battles are fought not just on distant fields, but within the hearts of those who return. Robert's funeral, attended by a crowd that spanned generations, became the culmination of this journey toward acknowledgement. The sight of active duty SEALs carrying his coffin, their expression solemn, was a testament to the bonds that transcend time and the enduring respect owed to those who sacrifice. His old prosthetic leg, now resting in the coffin alongside him, symbolized a life marked by hardship and quiet strength. The Veterans Organization's gesture of replacing it with a new one was more than symbolic. It was a tangible act of finally honoring a man who had given so much with so little recognition. The community's commitment to remember was woven into the ongoing rituals. Letters from school children who eagerly awaited stories from the silent veterans, annual gatherings at the community center where new generations learned of the hidden heroes among them, and the gentle persistence of those like Jackson, who carried the torch forward with reverence. Each act of remembrance was a thread stitching the past to the present, ensuring that the sacrifices, pain, and quiet dignity would not fade into oblivion. In the stillness of a small cemetery, beneath a simple headstone marked with his name and dates, lay the unspoken truth that had defined Robert's life. His silence spoke volumes. It was a silence born not of absence, but of endurance, not of insignificance, but of a steadfast commitment to service. The memory of his journey, and those like him, lingered not only in stone and ceremony, but in the hearts of a community forever changed, a community awakened to the power of remembering, honoring, and holding sacred the stories that shape us all.